Hello, I'm Stephen Robinson. Welcome to the Play Typer Guy podcast. If you're watching, please like, share, and subscribe. If you're listening to the podcast, please consider leaving a review. Don't forget to subscribe to the Play Typer Guy newsletter for fresh content sent straight to your inbox. My guest today is policy advocate Jamie Lynn Crofts, who's currently focused on protecting our democracy. She's going to offer us some insights into Wisconsin politics, so let's jump right in while my wife is still listening. Hey, Jamie, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. So, thank you for coming on to talk to us about the Wisconsin situation. First off, the maps. So, what happened there? Because I've been following your coverage of that.
Where do you want to start? Because you can go back, a few days, or you can go back 15 years.
I think we'll probably wind up going back 15 years, but let's start more recent first.
Yeah. So I guess, I'll kind of the briefest of overviews of the last, year in Wisconsin is that we had our wonderful state Supreme Court election in April, where Justice Janet kicked ass. And pretty soon after she was sworn into the Wisconsin Supreme Court, officially cementing the flip there were lawsuits filed against our mega gerrymandered state legislative maps. There was some fun infighting there where at first Republicans were threatening to impeach her for winning an election and still hearing cases because, that's not something that justices are supposed to do. But they quickly gave up on that when they realized how popular she was and just kind of the idea of fair maps are in Wisconsin. And blah, 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 boring litigation stuff. Jumping forward several months, a few weeks ago, there were some expert reports that the state Supreme Court had ordered and got back. And basically, they said, here are a handful of maps that the court should still consider. These handful of maps are not gerrymandered. All of the submissions from the Republicans in the legislature and the conservative law firm were gerrymanders, and they should not be in consideration. It was pretty clear that was how things were going to go. But after it finally happened, the Republicans started to panic a little bit and realized that not changing their gerrymandered maps after being ordered to by the court was not a smart litigation strategy. And in kind of a stunning turn of events, passed maps that our Democratic Governor Tony Evers had submitted to the court. It had been rumored, but also just happened kind of suddenly out of nowhere. And then governor's maps were back on his desk. There was a lot of speculation about whether he was going to or whether he should sign his own maps. And Monday he did.
And he's a Democrat, so these are fair maps, not just
right. Right. So there was quite a bit of infighting in between the time the maps were passed and the governor signed them within Democrats about whether he should sign his maps because, from a standpoint of wanting to win elected office in Wisconsin, there were maps before the court that were still fair, that were not gerrymanders, but that would have been friendlier for Democrats for various reasons than the governor's maps. But the governor's maps are fair maps. They are good maps. We are not going to be a gerrymandered hellhole anymore. We are actually going to have democracy in the state legislature again for the first time since 2009.
And this is very important, as I understand it, because when Republicans were sort of gerrymandering themselves as sort of a permanent supermajority, they were also once Evers defeated Scott Walker in 2018, they sort of were doing things where they kind of reduced his powers to, I think, traffic cop. And he, so that sort of thing that they would not be able to do anymore, even if in the next election, even if Democrats didn't get a majority, it's a good chance Republicans aren't going to have the supermajority who could do whatever the hell they want. Is that true?
Yeah, no, there would have to be a massive things would have to happen in this state for with these maps for there to be a Republican supermajority in the legislature. And it's true, they really did under, the maps that are still, we're currently acting under. They really did. They are one seat short of a gerrymander of a supermajority in the assembly, and they have it in the Senate. And this is in a 50-50, like as purple of a purple state as you can get.
And I think statewide, Republicans weren't actually dominating. They might be winning, but I don't think Ron Johnson was winning by massive numbers. I think, Trump narrowly won in 2016, but 2012, Obama, I think it was 7 points, and that was with the hometown guy on the ticket, Paul Ryan. He still dominated. So it would seem as if if in a fair fight, Democrats could, actually.
The assembly is totally up for grabs in November. It really could go either way now, which is just not a thing that has been possible in this state. Unfortunately, because of the way that Senate elections are staggered and the fact that the Supreme Court said, like, we're not redoing the 2022 state Senate elections, it's going to take a couple cycles for Democrats to have a fair shot in the Senate. But that's just kind of because of the nature of how the state Senate elections are staggered.
This is tremendous. I read something from Greg Sargent about how sort of a testament to, he called it incrementalism. I know that's, some folks consider that a bad word, but in the sense of slow and steady, when democracy will prevail. So after defeating Scott Walker, and for those old enough to remember, or who, I think pre-Trump, a lot of folks didn't follow a lot of politics that way. So a lot of the political nerds like myself, and perhaps you, were like really seeing, like, he was terrible, and his kind of reign of terror. He was at a sort of a less odious DeSantis, which is not hard to be, but he was sort of that way in Wisconsin. And then Trump came and kind of made him yesterday's news. But that was kind of, all right, we got rid of him. And then now we can we won this election, and we're going to win this election. And now we're at a place where it's a fair fight. So you were talking about the state Supreme Court election. That's the sort of thing, because you would see these polls where Trump is doing well, or winning, and it just seems that that's not been the result in actual voting in Wisconsin, like especially when abortion rights are on the ballot. That's not been what's the state of play. Like, what's your take on that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, so first of all, Ron Johnson is kind of the exception, not the rule, as far as our statewide elected people right now. All of our statewide, governor, Secretary of State has changed, but a Democrat won the last election. All of our statewide elected offices, our other U.S. senator, and now a majority of our state Supreme Court are all Democrats. Also, so both the gubernatorial election and that last state Supreme Court election were, the state Supreme Court election really was a blowout. Evers won by like a few points, which I and some other people jokingly were calling a Wisconsin blowout. But the thing is, I think that both of those races would have been closer if the less Trumpy candidate had won the primary. Trumpy candidates got through to the general in both of those, and they just don't have the statewide appeal here. Trump maybe does, and with the different, more people coming out in presidential election years, but like the Trumpy candidates for Supreme Court and governor have done terribly in the general elections.
But may I ask you this, Jamie? Is that true? So Trump was sort of 2016 was his evil "Come on, Eileen." That was his big one-hit wonder, and we can debate the specific circumstances of 2016 that he leveraged as a candidate, but he narrowly won only because of the Electoral College, then lost in 2020.
Yep.
He lost, and then he kept losing. I mean, people pointed this out, and the Trumpy candidates, as you say, have been losing. The MAGA candidates have been losing, but he sounds and talks like them, like a crazy person with a vendetta, which is not who he was in 2016. I think a lot of liberals want to believe that, well, he's always been terrible. And I think it's important to just strategize, to look at it and say, well, no, in 2016, he was putting on a good show and talking about things that certain people cared about. He had no solutions for them, but he was still sort of that guy from The Apprentice. And that's what people were buying into. And now he's, a cult leader. And I think that has less appeal. But do you believe, though, that there's still a sort of secret sauce that he might have that the other Trump candidates who failed statewide in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania lacked?
So it's hard for me to say because like I have never been one of the people who like ever found Donald Trump charming, even back in when he was just like a celebrity. And so it's hard for me to like understand that because I just never have understood why people find him charming, and it's interesting. Like, I want to say that I think Trump will easily get defeated here in Wisconsin. And, in general, that's what our elections would point towards. But at the same time, I don't know, and maybe it's just paranoia about, after 2016 and like the fear of him makes me, overestimate his chances in my head. I don't know. But yeah, it's just hard for me to say because I've never found him charming. And there are,
fair enough.
There are people who, for whatever reason, do. Although, like, some of our Trumpy candidates too, like, have also been kind of supremely unlikable, and I don't think anyone would call them charming. They were who people wanted politically, but didn't really have any type of charisma. So that may be a little bit of a difference.
Well, and this better than I, elections are won through coalitions. And if you kind of do the deep dive into 2016, and we remember that horror show on election day where he was exceeding, because it looked like, early voting in Florida, for instance, and other states, it's like, and then he's coming in and blowing the doors off benchmarks that Romney had set amongst the irregular voters. And that's the concern. That's what we think of as the Trump power, that, oh my God, he's going to do that again. And he almost did it again in 2020. But what defeated him in 2020, and I would say the hope for us, is he beat Hillary Clinton among independents, like in an independent sort of states where independents sort of decide elections. I would include Wisconsin in that. Same with he almost flipped Maine, came very close, kept Hillary Clinton under 50% there. And he clearly has been losing that. Like, independents have just find him abhorrent. So yes, he could get the cult members out again, but if Biden can win those independents, that puts us in a much better position to repeat 2020, which I guess this is earlier than I wanted to force you to have this discussion, Jamie, but it brings us up to the because you were talking about sort of the anxieties from 2016, which I think are legitimate. We're both members of communities that have legitimate reason to be concerned for another Trump presidency. And that brings us to Kamala Harris. So there's been a lot of debate about this, about the vice president. I've written about the Ezra Klein New York Times article where he had a West Wing hallucination, but people had pointed out that he kept like darting around the obvious point that if Biden were to step down, he should resign and let Harris run as the incumbent. And what I saw that came out from this was a lot of folks saying any concerns about Kamala Harris is racist or it's sexist or it's just and we are also members of marginalized groups who are just scared crapless. And so that doesn't translate. I would love for her to get a promotion, but that doesn't, my concerns is more about my ability to live. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
so forgive me. This is my convoluted sense of asking you: do you believe it's racist that people whose lives are at stake by the termination of the 2024 election or even 2028 are just concerned that a potential nominee would be someone who did not run a successful primary campaign, did not actually get to Iowa, is from California? I love California, but still, is from California, and the Electoral College exists, and you have to carry Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and this is all unproven. And
Mhm.
last I checked, we did not fix racism and sexism since 2016. I mean, I felt that that would have been in the news if that had happened. So
Right.
please.
No, and I think too that even if the fact, and I don't think the only reason that people may not love Kamala Harris would be racism or sexism, but even if that is the reason that like voters in Wisconsin, for example, might not vote for her, like that's still something I have to consider, because like you were saying, like our lives could be at risk depending on what happens after in this election.
Hmm.
um
Yeah. It was
and
interesting with Mandela Barnes, right? Can you add with that? Because Evers won, he didn't. And I think Democrats wanted to latch onto a policy issue. So the policy is that he's too far left. He was too, which itself is some of that is in weird ways racially coded, right? He was too friendly to these women of color from the the Democratic women of color and so forth. But Harris isn't. The suburban folks will love Harris and not, and the reason Mandela Barnes won to the dumbest senator, well, no longer has that title, unfortunately, thanks to the guy from Alabama. But so that had happened with Mandela Barnes as well. And you make the good point that like the we can't stop racists and sexists from voting,
yeah.
and that they vote, and either you can accommodate for that as or compensate for that as Obama did, or you lose. Like, I don't know. Do you think that that's also an issue, that kind of a self-fulfilling defeating prophecy from folks who, I think, amongst Democrats, want to believe that the reason Hillary Clinton lost, specifically in Wisconsin, was because people are sexist, as opposed to ways that she might be similar to men who have lost, like Gore and Kerry, perfectly good men, but who lost elections? What do you think of that?
Yeah. I mean, like, there are always many reasons why. And, like, I've told you before, like, I personally would be totally happy to only vote for, like, boring policy wonks who who struggle with giving good speeches, because, that's what I want. But that's not what voters want. And I have learned to accept that. And, unfortunately, we're not always going to have an Obama who was special in so many ways, as as a politician. But like, so like, it is. I don't know. It's hard for me to also get into too, because like I have such disdain for like the racists and sexists coming out to vote, and so I hate that I do have to consider that in my analysis. Like, but all of that is to say that like I do think a Black woman could win statewide office in Wisconsin or win a statewide election in Wisconsin. I don't know that that woman is Kamala Harris.
Yeah, and I know you perhaps non-ironically alluded to the, well, not this woman, but that woman. But I do think there's something to this, because we talk about Obama, and it was weird. People would say this and say, oh, well, Obama carried the Rust Belt. And I would, in a weird way, I felt like that was in itself a racist statement from the left, who to say that, because, well, Obama was a Midwest politician. He's from Illinois, like, and that mattered. So again, I had concerns about Gavin Newsom being able to carry the rest,
Yeah.
also because his ex-wife is married to Donald Trump Jr. So I feel like we should not nominate someone whose ex-wife works for Cobra and would just essentially have God knows what tapes or scandal. But
Right.
come on, there's no way, Gavin. Are you guys gonna agree to play fair as exes? No, forget it.
Right. And
You can never run again.
I mean, all you need to do for him to lose Wisconsin is republish those photos of that he took with his ex-wife, on bearskin rugs and stuff that were published in Vanity Fair or whatever. That's just show that to enough Wisconsin voters, and he's done here.
No, we all know that Gavin Newsom and Kimberly they went to an Eyes Wide Shut party, and come on, so forget it. But yeah, I mean, I do. We talk about the situation with Wisconsin, um, and that concern, and I think folks are concerned mostly because the idea of an accidental president. It's been rare this had occurred, and it's last time obviously was 60 years ago that LBJ won. It is risky, right? This is someone who hasn't successfully won a presidential primary, now running a general election campaign, who has been proven in that way, who we don't know has a base of support of their own that they can point to, like past presidents can. And also, it becomes very difficult to try to challenge that. You can't challenge a sitting president. So once she's the incumbent, she's essentially the nominee. And so there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety there that to me has something to do with what I think I like Kamala Harris fine. It's more of just, wow, that would be, I guess, and I don't know if you've seen this, that's sort of the sense of people a lot of her supporters being very excited. I would say that they're saying, I can't wait to be king about Biden dying, but they seem very excited about this. Oh, that will happen. It's like, well, look, I'm not excited about that. I don't want Biden to die, certainly not before this election, but even in this next term, because then 2028 is a millstone. It's just, okay, well, this is going to be our nominee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously. And what do we do? And it's not about my liking her or whatever. It's just that, again, that anxiety, that risk. So, and what do you sort of think of that as someone in politics or whatever? How did we get to that point? Because it just seems like if you're thinking of accidental presidents, she wouldn't have been someone I would have chosen. And why? Do you agree? And if so, why?
I think it's one of those things that politics have changed so much, in our lifetimes even. In some ways for the better and in some ways for the much worse. And this one I don't think is necessarily good or bad, but I don't know that an accidental president gets a big incumbency boost when they've just become president in the election year in that way. It kind of seems like something that in the olden times, people would think oh, there would be sympathy and that the boost from the incumbency. I don't know that that's the case anymore. Politics are just different now. We've got Donald Trump on the other side. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just sort of, it's more the sense of there is an incumbency boost, and it would be that she's the 2028 nominee if she just decides to run, because would be very charged to primary an incumbent president. It's very awkward to do that. It's very hard to do that, even if she says it should be an open process, because I actually didn't win a primary. She could be sort of like, hey, let's do it, and I'll support my record. It's still awkward, and obviously that becomes a challenge, and then it's that sense of an untested candidate, especially in the Rust Belt. And I know I keep going back to the California thing, but I think it would be the case, I like Katie Porter as well, but if Katie Porter were the vice president of California, to be like, okay, well, this is someone who hasn't tested that they can win in those states. And I know, it. I feel like there are some Democrats who get very frustrated if you sort of, they will say like, well, no, Black women decide elections. It's like, well, sure, Black women are awesome, but Wisconsin's pretty white. Independence in Michigan, like,
Yeah.
Michigan's a very diverse state, but like what is on the table? We have to win the Rust Belt. Like that's what you have to do. And so that's kind of the question of like how. And so when making that choice, I mean, I guess it's weird. I guess what we're asking is like, should Biden have made a choice on the idea that he literally was going to drop dead at some point during his terms? Because most presidents don't really do that. It's more of like worst case scenario or something, or I'm going to get dental surgery and I'll be loopy, and then this guy will sign something if necessary. That's usually how they choose a vice president. But here it just felt like, well, if you're choosing a potential accidental president, really, do you really get the senator from California, a very blue state, and someone who, unlike say 2008, where both of the candidates had sort of fought almost to a draw, you could say, okay, well, Clinton didn't win, but she's certainly a strong candidate.
Yeah, I mean, like at least when you go through the regular primary process, you do have the benefit of going through that. And even though, like, we don't base our, the Democratic candidate based solely on who wins Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and a couple, Nevada. It is good to have that to look at, to be like, okay, at least among Democrats, we know that this person is really popular in those states, or hey, we should consider the fact that they're not, and maybe try to balance that out when choosing the vice president. And not having that at all. And again, you kept going back to California, but like honestly, I keep thinking about it too. I don't think that plays well here. And you know what? We're actually, it looks like, going to get some idea of how Wisconsinites feel about carpetbaggers from California, not just Californians, and Tammy Baldwin's reelection, because it appears that we're going to have a rich Californian running against her on the Republican side.
Can you tell folks a bit about this person?
Yes. Oh gosh, how do you actually say his name? Give me a second here. But yeah, so Tammy Baldwin is up for re-election, and she is, pretty popular here in Wisconsin, hence being able to be elected as a lesbian woman. And it appears that the Republican candidate on the other side is going to be, how do you say it? Eric I tried to Google how to pronounce it, and I still didn't come up with Eric Hovde. I don't actually know how to say his last name, but he's a rich banker. A rich banker from California who, like, one of his 5 homes is like a vacation home in Wisconsin. And I mean, I guess I hadn't really seen anyone, in the state kind of taking charge of that Republican nomination, but I don't see how people think this is a thing that's going to go well for them.
And Tammy Baldwin's pretty popular in Wisconsin. My understanding, she is.
She is, and she's a lesbian woman, but she's very Midwest, and that plays here.
Well, yeah, and it's very interesting where regional differences, which I think matter, like how we connect to people, and elections are popularity contests to that degree, seeing that dismissed as racism. So even when people are talking about, well, maybe Gretchen Whitmer, and it's like, oh, you just want to replace the Black woman with the white woman. What I felt was very reductive, when it's just, no, I mean, and I don't think necessarily saying California versus Michigan or whatever, Midwest versus the coastal is sometimes that's often racially coded, but here there are legitimate cultural differences that can help with how you connect with people. We've discussed this because I feel like Democrats believe that, well, my policies are very good and I communicate these policies to you, but ultimately it's about trust. So when they say like, well, why don't these people, why are they voting against their self-interest, which is a term I don't really like. It's like, but well, because they don't trust you. So I don't, someone comes to my house and it's like, here's all this great stuff I'm going to do. And I don't trust them. I'm not going to even listen. Whereas if I trust you, it's like, okay, well, all right, maybe I'll see what you can do. And I feel like, as you're saying, being very Midwest, there's just sort of a cultural connection, a shorthand that is very effective. Klobuchar had that. There was talk that choosing Klobuchar, and that would have been itself history making as a woman vice president. But there was talk that there are many different theories, one being that Clyburn had really pushed for a Black woman, and that after the racial justice protests, George Floyd's death, that Klobuchar, who had some challenges, especially as a prosecutor and issues with the police, that made that impossible. But I don't know. It is an interesting question because there is a sense now in hindsight, if you're thinking about, again, the accidental president needing to carry the Rust Belt, and even just performance in the primaries, I think she overperformed. I think was hitting above her weight class, as you would call it. Klobuchar would have seemed a solid choice. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of remember feeling in 2020 like it was kind of inevitable that it was going to be Kamala. And part of it was just like, with the racial justice protests and like, and everything breaking with the Me Too movement and everything else, it just kind of seemed like it had to be a Black woman. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. I was so excited when, Biden said when he was running that he was going to put a Black woman on the Supreme Court, and damn if he didn't find an incredible one.
She's great.
I personally, like, I have so much love for Stacey Abrams that, that would have been my choice. But I'm sorry, I had a total ADHD moment and forgot where the rest of that sentence was going.
Well, Stacey Abrams arguably really kind of sort of took one for the team by becoming all the great work she was doing, made her a national figure, and then sort of right-wing boogie man that made it very hard. She just reads as far more liberal. Even on the same ticket, she was underperforming Raphael Warnock in Georgia.
And we do have to consider those things because, again, like we have to win elections. It's not just about who I want to see in power and the fact that we need fewer white men in power, even though we do.
Well, yeah, I mean, as long as the Electoral College exists, just you need someone. Midwest Democrats tend to be a sort of a viable, important force.
And it's just kind of like I think a pencil, someone from like Pennsylvania, even though that's not the Midwest, I think it could play if it not someone from like Philly, but I think that someone from Pennsylvania, like there, some of it can be similar culturally in some ways to like Ohio, Wisconsin, parts of Illinois, but like there's just kind of, it's not even a coastal thing. It's hard, it's hard for me to describe. Like I grew up in the Midwest. I'm back here now. And it's not just about geography. It's just kind of like the Midwest vibe.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's Trump, though people have argued that he was sort of Florida at heart for the longest time.
He's Florida man, whether he lived there or not.
But he was from New York and won the presidency. But generally speaking, and then people point to, well, Kamala could do it because Nixon and Reagan won, which is one of those statements that, well, those are true things you just said. I don't know how to actually, it's not an actual political analysis. It's just, okay, those are actual truth statements, but okay. Um, but yeah, as far as Democrats winning, if you go back my lifetime, it's Carter from Georgia, then Clinton, Arkansas, a Southerner, and then Obama for the Midwest, and then Biden, who, working class Scranton Joe was his sort of persona. And so, what was interesting to me about the 2020 primary was sort of like both in Biden's support among Black voters and his working class appeal. He was sort of a breed of Democrat that I don't know that, at least amongst the folks running, it was hard to say, well, who's a younger version of this? There was folks who kind of, had bits of like a menu, like I had parts of it. Okay, well, these guys running, there were so many. Like, okay, well, Self Moulton, and they might have these white guys have like the Midwest thing and sort of unassuming white guy. They've got that, and then they've have gotten his support amongst Black people. Maybe though he was always dominated, you could see where okay, well, they say now, well, Kamala will deliver that aspect. It's okay. Well, you've got to form it all together, and I feel like it is that sense of who's doing that. And I think people were going to go back to Gretchen Whitmer because, again, in a tough election cycle, and she won against the Trump the MAGA candidate, and very decisively, and she again in 2018 as well had that coalition of like, if you look, because Michigan kind of reflects that, like she did very well with Black voters, very well with independents and suburban voters. It's like, oh, okay, I can see it. And I think folks are, once again, I feel like when we talk about democracy is on the line, your life depends on, when I get those shouty emails, right, every day from Democrats, and then suddenly I'll just go online and be like, I just kind of worry because she just, Kamala, what would happen because Kamala hasn't, and then everyone's suddenly yelling at me as if it's like, well, you just told me I'm sorry. It's just like my life is on the line.
Yeah, particularly when like not only is, the candidate who wants to get rid of democracy and, hates people who, are from marginalized groups generally, but has also like vowed revenge against everyone. Like, oh yeah, it's like the queer voting rights abortion lady and, the Black guy who criticizes him all the time. Like, we're going to do great in that purge. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's not like believe us, if we're concerned, it's like it's just not, because Kamala's gonna be fine wherever. She's gonna still get her check. She's in a good shape. Like she's vice president. Like that was awesome. But it's just for me, it's like whoever can win. I think Biden will get us for this year. I think Biden can beat Trump. But the problem is like the flip side of Greg Sarge's argument about incrementalism is that it's a long battle, as we've seen, when you're especially against gangsters. So don't drink all the champagne. Have a little if we win in 2024, but then it's 2028, and Trump will probably run again. But let's hope that that's not a possibility. What is the party looking like? I've seen some other folks who, I hate to say that people's opinions are wrong. I don't like to do that, but they keep saying that it'll be Nikki Haley, and it just makes zero sense to me. And I had written about this before because it's like, well, we've witnessed this. Like Democrats who are mostly rational, mentally stable people, they have not forgiven Bernie Sanders or Jill Stein for what they perceive as having damaged Hillary Clinton sufficiently that Trump won. So certainly people who are all about rage and vendettas and whatever are going to blame the lady who they believe has damaged Trump amongst independents and will cost him the election, especially when she's running on the he sucks amongst independents and it's terrible platform. So like to me, she's done. As we're recording this, so we have no idea what's going to happen because it's going to air sometime next week. But tomorrow, as we record this, is the South Carolina primary, and Nikki Haley is looking to get completely crushed. But the upside of her losing the state where she was governor so decisively is that she's losing to a rapist. That could, that's what you could bring that to her. Well, ambassador, you lost. Here's where you lost every demo, but he's also a rapist, and was just hit with major fines for business fraud, and he's indicted on many cases. But they still your home state. You lost your own district. It's
Yeah.
so uh what and she's going to endorse him anyway. We know inevitably she's
Oh,
going to endorse him.
100%.
So uh but yeah, so it's not her. They again, Ezra Klein fantasies came up again because people's like, well, she's just staying in it so that if Trump dies, he can get the nomination at the convention. It's like, okay, well, again,
Yeah.
I don't want to say that you're wrong. I'm just saying let's walk through this. There are lots of people. There are other gangsters who have like waited. They were smart enough not to go into the haunted house. Like this GOP primary was like the haunted house. It's like, hey, well, maybe they're all like, I'm not going in there. They were all like, all the red, they're all Star Trek red shirts running in this primary. Like, I'm okay, well, I'm not going to be Yeoman Johnson going in this primary and losing to Trump and to this cult leader. But if he dies, I think everyone from Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, like on so that's what we would get, right? You
Oh,
get
yeah.
a Hawley, Marjorie Taylor Greene ticket. It'd be a nightmare ticket. Because all these people who held back, Tom Cotton, who held back, who saw, I think he looked at polling
Yeah.
and he couldn't beat Trump. So that would be him, everyone. So there'd be a stampede of people. Haley running was like, you're just gonna.
Oh yeah, no, it is totally only and like I've said this before, like I loved West Wing, but it destroyed the minds of millions of Americans who think that like fairy tale land is achievable in American party politics. And like, yeah, I'm sure in the West Wing season of this race, it ends up being Kamala versus Nikki Haley. Sure. That's not the world we live in.
I remember the final season of West Wing where the Latino Democrat, Jimmy Smits, wins South Carolina, but the moderate Republican played by Alan Alda wins California. And it's like, okay, well, how? How's that possible? Like, what is. And I think, and of course, and Santos wins Texas because he's from Texas. Again, how? How is that possible? Oh, right. You just really believe politics is just about persuasion. You can change like an entire cultural and political associations and beliefs with just a charming man with a compelling argument, and that can change everything. It was astonishing to me because, as you said, you're someone who does politics for a living. You'd have to be looking at this like, well, this. Why don't you just have a warp drive in this and call it good? Because this is all fantasy.
Yeah, it's just not real life. And like now I'm like going off in like my mind on all of like my many comments that I have on West Wing. Like I loved it so much. And also here is my long list of criticisms of how it worked people's brains. And also like someone needs to teach Aaron Sorkin about like why reproductive rights are important if that hasn't gotten through yet. Because like when I go back and watch West Wing now, I'm like, oh yeah, President Bartlett's actually anti-choice. He'll approve of it politically, but he'll still in his head think you're a murderer.
Yeah, he was heard of Biden, right? So again, like that, and so Bartlett is a very compelling figure in certain ways. Biden was kind of has that aspect, but like isn't as pompous about. He's not as elitist and smart and goes on about stuff, and so he's relatable. But yes, as that was always how it stood in politics and with guns and with everything. It was very, middle class white guys, their view of world, often lecturing women, men of color were nowhere to be seen. And So yeah, but I do think that is a sense of how people view politics in a way of just like they believe things can happen that fundamentally can't. They're just impossible. And but there's pushback to that because like, well, it could, right?
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
could win. No,
Yeah.
she cannot.
Like I love when we put like Glenn Close on the Supreme Court and like have our cute little compromise. Like that's adorable. That's not real life. It's fun
No.
for fiction.
Well, I mean, I think Democrats do love compromise, the
Oh
perception
yeah,
of compromise.
actually, like yes, giving a Supreme Court seat to Republicans is absolutely something that Democrats would do just like for fun. Like when Obama was president and Democrats had the Senate, and they were like, you know what, we're going to make our blue slip rules tighter to make it more difficult to confirm Obama's judges, because that
No,
sounds
yeah.
like something that Democrats should do to themselves.
Yeah, I mean, while I still have you here, I know Ezra Klein alludes to Ruth Bader Ginsburg in his piece, where he says Biden could become like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which again, those are two names you put into a sentence. Okay, I mean, and they are real people. You spelled the names correctly, and that was the extent of the journalism. So, but what people don't really get, and this always frustrates me, and you follow this closely, was Democrats would not have let, they were very defensive of the perception of stacking the court. So, basically, Obama got his two justices, Kagan, Sotomayor. And so then for him to just go and like, okay, I'm just forcing everyone out over a certain age so I can put more, younger liberal women. And I think I got into a time machine and brought 1968 Angela Davis here, and she's going to go on and it's going to be awesome. Like that was never going to happen. There's going to be from his own party that sort of pushback. I mean, and it's sort of when I see people say, well, why didn't Democrats, when they had the House and Senate, why didn't they codify Roe? It's like, well, they didn't have the votes for it, which unfortunately is a sort of a twisted argument, right? Because then it seems, well, but you also said that Republicans would never overturn Roe because it's so unpopular. Yet why did we have all these Democrats who were anti-choice that we couldn't? So it's like, what was going on? Either it's popular or it's not.
Yep, including like the Tim Ryans in super blue Chicago area districts. Like, what in the world? Like, why? How? And I mean, a lot of that goes back to the fact that Democrats are afraid to stand for anything and prefer to stand against things, which I just, is a messaging failure that always bothers me too, because like, I feel like the lessons that we've learned over the last decade plus, particularly from the presidential years, but not only, is that voters don't just want to vote against someone, they want to vote for something. And like,
well, believe in something.
And just quick, like also when you're thinking about a state like Wisconsin that, Biden won by 20,000 votes only, you also need to think about the fact that like turnout is important too. And that's actually one of the things that I'm the most afraid of for this election, is just that there's not kind of that positive messaging. There's not people feeling like they're going out and voting for something. It's we're voting against Trump. And it is important to vote against Trump, but I don't think that necessarily gets people out on election day.
Well, what about the argument that was sufficient in 2020? What would you say has changed?
I mean, 2020 though was just a weird, with the pandemic being in full force in 2022. It was also just a weird year for a presidential election. Like in Wisconsin, mail-in absentee ballot numbers were way higher than they are now. I think in 2020, everyone was like affirmatively notified of their right to, in Wisconsin, to request a mail-in absentee ballot. And I think that kind of thing did end up driving voter turnout up, at least here.
Also, thinking of 2020, which again was closer than predicted, but it was a case where something else I've written about was how Trump sort of benefits from so many scandals. It's like it'd be the craziest West Wing season because it's like, what, this week there's this and there's this. Which case is there's too many cases. Like there's one case. Like if you're making a movie, you would make it one case every time they do a courtroom drama. It's like it's just the one case. And they put at the end, it's like, well, there technically were two cases, but come on, for dramatic effect, we just made it one. But here it was a case of where there was only one story. It was COVID. Everyone had to stay home. Even the people who checked out, like a lot of people, specifically suburban folks, independents. I knew a lot of these people. I don't want to diss white ladies, but often folks who are like, I can't even with politics. Someone will say that. Someone on my Facebook feed even said, "Oh, Jon Stewart's back. I might start actually. I'll break my politics fast." It's like, what? I'm sorry if he gets you to actually care that women are dying in states because they don't have abortion rights and trans people are. I'm sorry, it's a bummer, but you've got to be aware of it to fight. There was no escape. You ran out of Tiger King episodes, and everyone was at home, and everyone saw there was one story, and he was terrible. And he was there every day talking about injecting people with bleach. And that kind of made it the one story. And I feel like that's the challenge of this year, like of getting, as we've seen with how the media is covering Trump. So what are your sort of thoughts on that as well, as far as being able to nail him down?
Oh, I mean, don't get me started on press coverage of Trump and just like all of the many failures that there have been over the last decade-ish in that. I mean, like truly, I don't even know where to start. It's like that New York Times PitchBot Twitter account is just like so close to reality sometimes.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's a confirmed rapist. He's a rapist, and there will be articles, and I feel like forget mentioning that he's got all these indictments against him. Many will cover him about the election. They will not even mention that, which they should, but they don't mention he's a rapist. As I remember, my late mother, God love her, she was always like about like, don't do anything, it'll be on your record forever and all of that. Like I would think of that in my head. I remember once colleges and I were out. We couldn't find a place to go to the bathroom. You're drinking, and my friend, my sorority girl friend, she's like, I just want to go. She's about to go, and it's like, no, we can't, because that'll be every time. As my mother said, it'll be no matter what you do. Heather, sword on the Supreme Court. Heather, public urinator, was confirmed to the Supreme Court today. It's like, come on, that was like 30 years ago.
Well, and in some states, you have to register as a sex offender because
despite her history of public urination, Heather landed on Mars and discovered life. We cannot confirm or deny whether she urinated publicly when she landed on Mars, because that's the thing she has done. Like that would just stick, or like just forget it. So he was, and not just positive rape, but like, okay, well, I sexually assaulted a woman and I'm terrible. I'm going to defame her, because that's me. I feel like it's like the extra level of horrible to it. Like it's not just for that.
Yeah,
it was just that he kept it's defaming the woman he assaulted, and that's what he got busted for.
Yeah, like that's what the case was actually about. Like the statute of limitations had passed on suing him for the actual rape, but the fact that he just constantly defamed her and made up terrible shit about her was what led to him being found to be a rapist by a court of law. And like, I mean, the fact that anyone was ever like, maybe he didn't do it. Like, hi, I heard the Access Hollywood tape. Like, he brags on tape about sexually assaulting women. Why is this something that anyone would be surprised to learn that he did?
Yeah, I think any horrible thing that a human being has done, I would believe that Trump has done. Like, if it's physically impossible, like, flying on his own volition, his own power, it's like, okay, he probably did not do that. Or like reading to his child before bed. No, that he didn't do that. I find that highly unlikely. So, but yeah, it's astonishing, and to sort of set this up, because when folks are saying, "Don't worry," when polls, and I had some people even at my former writing grounds had kind of snottily responded to me what I just said. Well, we should be concerned if there's polls where Biden's trailing Trump. Let's not freak. We don't have to freak out, but let's just prepare for that and do whatever we can. Let's overcompensate. And the response was a lot of like, these polls are stupid. We don't believe in polls anymore. It's like, oh, okay, well, fine. And my favorite was, well, Obama was behind Romney, and then Obama won. It's like, okay, well, again, those are all people who existed, but Obama, like Romney's campaign, like you showed, like his numbers tanked when he was caught on tape, not raping anyone, but like just being a jerk about, people not paying taxes. Like he was susceptible to, similar with Nikki Haley. People think that Nikki Haley is more of a risk if she were to win than Trump, but like she is susceptible to political gravity, like we saw with her ridiculous Civil War. Like that was a news cycle for days.
Yep.
And it altered, that would be something that people would leverage and would hurt her pollings and whatever, like a normal candidate. So to me, it's like, well, if you're behind someone who's a rapist, it's very hard. Like there's no, I think you're all out of October surprises. Like, okay, maybe he's a werewolf. At this point, it won't matter. Like, I mean,
No,
using the
I mean,
baby as human shield.
yeah, the thing about how he could, shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue or whatever it was, and is true. And his cultish base would not leave him. In fact, they would find a reason to rally around and say that he was a hero for it.
Has that surprised you, that level of folks who have just been like, yeah, well, he's being mistreated. He's like the guy Putin killed because they're trying to hold, like, this the level of just lawlessness that the Republican Party has. I mean, I think you and I have never had illusions about the Republican Party, but
no, the openness and the way that like crimes and human rights violations and murders are now like celebrated openly. Like, no, I don't think that like the people who are celebrating this were good people before Trump. But I do not like the fact that like celebrating, children dying after getting beat up in bathrooms, like, is a thing that happens now and that there aren't repercussions for on the right.
yeah, it's a sad state of affairs. But the good news, I wanted to end on a positive note, is that Wisconsin is in much better shape now, thanks to people like yourself who've been, organizing and getting people to the polls and raising awareness about it. It doesn't happen without the work you people do. Is there any plugs or anyone
Just
you'd like to call out before we
huge shout out to
go?
everyone in the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition, which they had been organizing before I moved back here and like really fought this fight from the ground up, really built grassroots support around it. Got like resolutions passed in counties around the state saying, people want fair maps. And it was all of that laid the groundwork that got us to where we are. So just like amazing work to everyone who was a part of that fight, in the nonprofit world and the people in the legislature who are fighting the good fight and trying to get us maps, the lawyers who filed the lawsuit. I mean, it was just really, like you were talking earlier about coalition building, like this was a thing where there was such a big coalition built around the fair maps issue that it became an issue in our statewide elections and something we were able to finally do something about.
Great, wonderful. Where can people find you if you want people to find you?
So let's see. On the hellhole formerly known as Twitter, I'm at Jamie Lynn Crofts. On a lot of the other Mastodon, I think I'm Jamie Lynn at something. Blue Sky, Jamie Lynn C. You know, it's something like that. All the places. Search for my name and you can find me.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, for talking through the political situation with me. I'm sure we'll have you back on as this progresses, because again, Wisconsin, because of our weird electoral college system, Wisconsin is a very important state. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time. Everyone, like, share, subscribe, and thanks for watching.